Okay, everyone, a good day. Good day to all here in Palm Springs. We've got some sunshine, at least right now there's sunshine. Megan, I hope that you're all right, that the rain wasn't too difficult.
It pours and pours and pours, but where I am, I'm fine.
There you go.
Not flooded out yet.
Excellent, excellent. And in Baltimore, how's the weather, Malka? Just need you to unmute, otherwise we'll never know what the weather is in Baltimore because we can't look it up ourselves.
It's 29 today, so it's good.
29.
Not snow and no rain, so that's a good thing.
Oh, 29, you mean Fahrenheit. Oh, okay.
Oh, right.
Some of you know that Sasha and I still keep our phones because
Oh,
our phones are Celsius always, yeah. And although my car is miles, still on Waze, it's kilometers. So anyway, it's good to, that way we feel more international, more. All right then. So we are actually at the end of the first section of Joshua today, what's called what we've been doing until now. I didn't break it down this way beforehand, but is what's known by some as Sefer HaMilchamot, the Book of Wars of Joshua. We're going to go into second half of Joshua is a lot about the distribution of the land and the settle of the land, and we're going to get to some pretty difficult chapters coming up, not because of the gore and the brutality as much as because of the boredom, but I'll have to figure that out, right? That's something that we're not skipping any. I know, Roberta, you want to skip, but we're not going to skip. I still hold to Roberta when she complained years ago about all this priestly stuff, all these sacrifices, and that was a long time ago. But we've come a long way, Roberta, right? We have learned to embrace the boredom and make that which is irrelevant relevant to our lives. Thank you to everybody who showed up yesterday to this really good event that we had together with two other church communities. We did it at the Methodist Church, and there were folks from the Lutheran community as well, with Father Tim, with Reverend Tim, who were with Pastor Tim. I think he goes by Pastor Tim, who were with us. Unfortunately, I will say there was somebody who came. There were two people that came, but one spoke who were not there to learn. They weren't there to learn. They weren't there to see and take in with the movie. The movie was Disturbing the Peace, which is a kind of a documentary made in-house by the organization Combatants for Peace, which I think is a very important, albeit small organization. It was about the personal experiences of Israelis and Palestinians. And the cardinal thing is, when somebody tells you their story, and these people were telling us their story from their point of view, it's not news in that way. It's not writing of history in the classical sense of history. It is listening to their story. And we all need to listen, including myself, including to the person who was in that room who I was not interested in listening to. There have been times I have listened to that person and that organization stand with us. But yesterday was not that time. Yesterday was the time to listen and to learn and to be open. And so I apologize to any of you, our regular people, if I seemed gruff or rude in any way to this person, but I have a really low tolerance for people that come into our house, and that was our house, even though it was a Methodist church, our house, where we're doing things under our rules. This wasn't a public space in that way. It certainly wasn't a policy meeting for her to speak that way about the Palestinian Jewish conflict. Or Midbar has been an attempt, and so far I'm very pleased with this, a successful attempt to create a space in which we can talk about political issues, especially when it's once removed in Israel-Palestine. We can talk about our own tradition and the challenges in our tradition without having to talk apologetics all the time. We can talk about our traditions and how they meet up with other faith traditions. And I'm proud of that space, and I will defend that space fiercely. And what some of you saw yesterday, maybe you weren't noticed, but what I felt afterwards, had that feeling in here that I used to have a lot that I don't want to have. I don't want to be in that kind of position, but I will defend fiercely our ability to have open conversations, to let people speak their minds, where they're coming from, and to hear others. Okay, that was meant as an apology to those, to the few that are here. Oh, Roberta's showing us a book, which is, now, did you read that book with the book club, Roberta?
I
That is-
think so. Yeah, that was, am I muted? No.
Yeah.
What book is it? What book is that?
Show
again?
it up again, would you?
A
Um,
Paragon.
This is really one of the best books I have read in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's
the
by
name of the book?
Callum McCann.
I'll throw it
And
up. in
it's
just-
about, yeah, okay, it's about an Israeli and a Palestinian and their growing friendship out of their pain and loss of each losing their daughters.
And it's an interesting genre. It's a, well, it's not,
Called a novel.
but the things that a lot of it is, it's based on actual things, right? It's actual
Yeah,
events. Yeah, so historical novel, I guess, but what's amazing about it is that it brings in that word aperion it means an object that has infinite numbers of sides to it. So it's this it's such a beautiful thing, but he brings in from history and biology or your nature, the birds, I mean, masterful. I was so impressed with that book. So impressed. Okay, anyway, and that book is based on the story of combatants for peace. So yeah, I'm glad we got to see it. And I think that Jane and I agree that we're going to try to see movies more often together. I know it's not that I think we'll try to go for movies that are in English because of the screen and the elevation. The issue, I could see some people in the back couldn't read the subtitles, especially the taller people amongst us, like Rita Claire, who was very tall but still had no. But I saw that, so we'll figure it out. But I think it's lovely for us to see a movie, maybe a shorter movie, and then to have a conversation about it. I really enjoyed that. Okay, another way to bring Jews and Christians together. Okay, thank you, Roberta. Thanks for bringing that. I would have shown my copy, but I gave my copy. I got my copy from one brother-in-law, Sasha's brother, Yop, and we were traveling from Israel to Holland to visit him, and I gave my copy to Chabi to visit her other brother, who is the interesting about Sasha loves to talk about when she was growing up, when she was an adolescent. In her house, she had 3 older brothers. One is no longer with us. He died early of cancer. And he was into macrobiology and yoga and karate and very down to earth and a vegetarian. And then she had a brother who was the head of all the Jewish organizations. That he was the president of the Organization of Jewish Organizations in Amsterdam or in Holland at the time, very Zionist, and soon after moved to Israel with his wife and his little child and another child. And then she had a brother, Javi, who had studied Arabic studies and Arabic and Islamic studies in the university and was a charter member of the PLO in the early 70s. She used to get the mail to his house. And that's how Sasha grew up. So if you're wondering how Sasha can be on one hand traditional, yet so open to so many different things, there's your answer. That was the lovely house that she grew up in. Okay. All right. So that too is part of our study, right? To understand the context from where each of us are coming from. And that's why I welcome you, as some of you do, but I welcome Rita Claire does this a lot, and it's good to bring it back home. When we study something and there's something that says, well, that reminds me of whatever, share with us. Maybe it won't resonate with everybody, but share with us. That's the loveliness of having such a small group that we can do that together. Okay?
I don't think we read that book at book club, Roberta.
you don't think so?
I don't think so. I don't know. Richard may have a better memory.
Richard, unmute, please.
Yeah, yes, we did. It was, I just looked it up.
Please.
It was one of the books I personally did not read, but it's in the list.
Yeah, Richard has a rule. If the book is like more than 120 pages, he doesn't really read it.
It was kind of like that. It's not 120, but it's more like in the 390 range.
I just read Barbara, which is in the 900 plus range. Barbara Streisand's thing. So, but that's all I do, right? That's all rabbis really have to do is just to sit at home and read. That's basically my job, right? Okay, so this is the story, right? We had that battle, the battle of the five kings, and people mentioned now maybe it's connected to the 4 or 5 kings of Genesis, and it's not a world war, but it's a big war. It's not just one nation against another nation, and nations are small here, I understand. But this was last week was a group of them coming together. Well, that's part of the land. That's like in the center part of the land, but or yeah, southern center part of the land. But today we have in the first section the northern part of the land. The same thing happens. A group of kings get together, and you could say gang up on Israel. You could say try to defend themselves, run for their or defend their lives they have, because the word is out that Joshua and the people, according to the story, don't know history here. According to the story, Joshua and the people are kicking butt. Okay, so why don't we begin with verse 1? Sid, would you like to read today? Just unmute first.
When the news reached King Yabin of Hazor, he sent messages to King Yoab of Madan, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Achshaph, and the other kings of the north, in the hill country, in the Arabah south of Kinneret, in the lowlands, and in the district of Dor on the west, to the Canaanites, to the Hivites at the foot of Hermon, in the land of Mizpah. They took the field with all their armies, an enormous host, as numerous as the sands of the seashore, and a vast multitude of horses and chariots. All these kings joined forces. They came and encamped together at the waters of Meron to give battle to Israel. Wow.
Okay, so what are you struck by, Sid? What's the wow?
It's a lot of kings.
A lot of kings.
So I guess back in those days, it wasn't one king over the whole land. It was just one king over a so small section.
Right, or as we've talked before, maybe over a city-state.
The city-state,
Fortress
yes,
state,
right.
right, with people with vassals around.
Right.
Yeah, not kingdom. This is not like Assyria and Egypt. These are
No.
more like I would maybe fiefdoms, but for all intents and purposes, in the reality of the book of Joshua that's describing, they're kings, right? And they have
They're kings.
followers and they have armies. And yes, Ella, please unmute first.
Okay, aren't there like tribes or clans, maybe just big tribes?
Well, tribes to me, although it's probably not to everybody, to me, a tribe kind of means nomadic tribes of moving around herdsmen. And while a tribe could be, I don't know if it's right to use the word tribe for people that have settled in the city. I think once you've settled in the city and you have walls and you have army and weapons, you're more like a nation state. But yeah, it's a question of size, and I don't know. Remember we had some numbers that were in the hundreds. We had numbers that were in the thousands. It seems like the tens of thousands are exaggerated. Hundreds, thousands. I don't know. There are those that's their expertise, to cull through all the numbers in biblical historical writings and tell us what it might be, and then to combine that or interface that with archaeology, because you can look at a town that's been uncovered, let's say Tel Chatzor. That's going to come up here, Chatzor. That's a huge city in Canaanite terms. I don't know, but I'm sure Dan will look it up as we're talking, how large it was and how many people were thought to be there. They can tell that. Archaeologists can tell that. That's not rocket science. That's archaeology. It's only archaeological science. You can figure that out by how large the town was and bones and things like that. So,
but even Hatzor in relation to the area that was uncovered is pretty tiny compared to the area that surrounds Hatzor, Rosh Pin.
Good point. So that's a good point. I'm going to throw up a map in a second. I don't know if it's the best map, but it's a map that I quickly found now. The one of the things we've been talking about, Klaus often brings this up as well, is the city-state kind of a thing. They're the people in the city, but they're the fields around and the hamlets around. They all allegiance. So not everybody lives. we're used to big cities and big towns. What would it be like in? Yeah, I don't know. If we take Israel, the time that you lived there, Ella, there was Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. That was about what there was, right, as far as cities were concerned. And maybe there were only really tall, but one tall building in Tel Aviv. Everybody was part of Israel. Everybody. That's a bad analogy. Forget it. I don't know. Yeah. Let's take a look at second for the map and see if that helps us in any way. Okay. So we're going to get to Merom here. Merom in the connection with Meron, which is near Tzfat today. So the northern mountains, Chatzor is north of the Kinneret. It's a rather large, as far as archaeological digs are concerned.
Right.
It began to be dug up, I think, in the 50s. When I think that's when publications started. Again, I'm usually not interested personally in that, but there is an area here for us to look at called Arava. We usually think of the Arava being down here, desert, but that's because Arava itself means wilderness, right? So it all depends compared to what. And the Arava here refers, I'm telling you this now because it's going to be in the story, refers to the Jordan River Valley. For those of you that have been to Israel, you know that on the banks of the Jordan, both sides, there's greenery. It's called the Zor. I don't know, that may be from the Arabic, but the Zor, and that was good. Was good farmland. I say was because almost all the areas on the Israeli side have been cleared to make sure the terrorists can't get across. There's minefields. I did a huge amount for years, probably 10 years. I did my reserve duty up and down this river, patrolling or on the banks of the river in an outpost. So it used to be lovely. When I first got there in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of areas that were like the closest things we had to jungle. And there are wild boar and birds you don't see in other parts of Israel. Just beautiful, beautiful area. And with time, a lot of that got either turned into farmland, or it was just the area next to the river was made into no man's land. Anyway, we had Gilgal a lot. That's down here. The Israelites came in from this way. Jericho would be over here.
Right.
And we're talking about this whole area up here. Hermon is the mountain, the highest mountain we have that is covered in snow for part of the year, a good part of the year. And that's going to be mentioned here. That is the borders of Israel now go from the Kinneret, encompass, if you follow my cursor, around like this, the Golan Heights, and then go back down a little bit here, to, this would be where Metula is right now.
Right.
And then Chatzor and Rosh Pinah, what Ella mentioned before, I would hear. The beautiful, beautiful area. A green area where there are different parts that are level, that Ella, like the farmland that you can imagine, you can picture in your mind. But in areas over here, there's a lot of wadis, there's a lot of canyons and riverbeds that don't run the whole year, but they drain the rain, all going to the west where the sea is. And that I mention those here because that's in our story. And here it's mentioned there are 15 northern kings. So the concept of a kingdom there is very different than what we're thinking of, like the King of England. It's more, dukes. Yes.
One of the famous ones in a little south of Chatzor is Wadi Amud.
Right. So Wadi Amud is actually, Wadi Amud is around here.
Right,
It's
exactly.
north of the Kinneret. It's near Tzfat. It's kind of, if Tzfat, Merom is here, so it's about halfway.
It's southeast of, kind of 45 degrees southeast of Tzfat.
Tzfat, right? Yeah, a beautiful hike to take with this pillar on Amud, hence the name Wadi Amud, and with Nachal Amud, with water that runs. A lot of the years that I was hiking in the 70s, there was a lot of sewage running through there, unfortunately.
Just as a point of information, this is where I lived. I lived right near on top of Wadi Amud, practically in a kibbutz called Hakuk. And before I got there, there was a flood in Wadi Amud, and one of the members was killed. He was with a tractor, and he
Excellent.
was killed in the flow of Wadi Amud.
Right. So Kibbutz Chakuk is important from a totally different time that we actually I brought either in the context of Talmud or probably in the context of our study of the book of Acts, or it could have been Matthew. But there's an important ruins of a after I was in Denver at the convention, there's an archaeological dig of a synagogue in Chakuk that has amazing mosaic floors that haven't entirely been published yet, but some of them have.
This
Anyway,
was
great, thank you. What's that?
It was after my time. It was after we left.
Oh, these are things that are being excavated now.
No, it's recent. Yeah.
Yeah, now. Okay, so I hope that gives an idea for those that are familiar with the map of Israel, kind of where we're talking about. This first part of a chapter is the war against or with the northern kings. Okay, where did they go? Sue, you're out. Would you like to read, or are you
Sure.
going to be incognito today?
No, I'm having a problem with one of my eyes, that's all.
Oh, so
It's okay,
oh, you can read. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, sure. But God said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. Tomorrow at this time, I will have them all lying slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. So Joshua, with all his combat troops, came upon them suddenly at the waters of Meron and pounced upon them. God delivered them into the hands of Israel, and they defeated them and pursued them all the way to Great Sidon and Mizrapoth, Maim, and all the
Mayim.
Mizpah on the east. They crushed them, letting none escape. And Joshua dealt with them as God had ordered him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots.
Okay, responses, replies, reactions.
Just think in,
Well,
there's somebody else.
Go ahead, Malka.
Oh, okay. I just think I was struck by the number of times in Sefer HaMilhamot 1-10 that God has to tell Joshua Al Tirah.
So
He
God
said
says
it
to-
pretty much before every engagement.
right, Gal Tira meaning don't be afraid.
Right.
Right,
I'm
not all of our folks know Hebrew. That's why.
Right. So don't be afraid.
Right. Yeah. Al Tira. Yeah. Don't
Mhm.
be afraid. This constant reassurance. Although I might say that if you look at the first paragraph, we had towards the end numerous. They took the field with all their armies, an enormous host, as numerous as the sands of the seashore, a vast multitude. So the numbers here are emphasized. In other words, Joshua, you did until now, but Joshua, we imagine him saying, yeah, but God, I never had this big of a vote. No, don't worry, even with all that are there. And then there's one more thing also. It's not just their numbers. What else do they have, the enemy?
They have horses and chariots.
Horses and chariots.
We
And I don't mind-
do horses and chariots. Horses and chariots are the other guys, right?
Right.
The Egyptian armies running after us and their horses and chariots sinking in the Red Sea after the water covered them and drowned them again, right? We don't do horses and anybody remember another story that we've done together over the last few years that has horses and chariots?
Sisera, Gideon and Sisera.
Exactly. And there are those biblical scholars over the last 100 years that say that these are actually two accounts of that same story. That this is really part of that tradition. I don't think that's the case, but that doesn't matter. It's in the same area. The same people are involved. Many of the same people are involved, and that thing comes up again with David. Also, there's a tendency to there's at least one verse in Samuel where they did away with how do you fight chariots and horses? You can burn the chariots if you get a hold of them. What do you do to the horses?
Well, it's suggesting
Use
that
bow and arrow.
Hamstring them.
Right, what were you saying, Richard?
that's crippling the horses.
You don't like that, do you?
No, I don't. I mean, why not just, just let them go. They'll go wild. They can go feral. I mean, or just, I don't know, keep them or do something else with them, but cripple them?
Or I would say, why not just kill them?
Yeah, that too. And you can,
Didn't
kill
they-
them mercifully.
Go ahead, who was asking something?
Didn't they use bows and arrows at that time?
Well, and let's assume they did.
They could kill the horses with the bows and
Yeah,
arrows.
but that's not what the word hamstrung is. I don't know what it says in Hebrew, but
Crippling them.
hamstrung in
Yeah.
English means that they were crippled. They weren't killed. They were crippled.
Iker, the word is Iker. Iker means to, that's, everybody translates hamstring here. It means to cripple. The question, it might be, is that just the word that's used to destroy horses? Why not just to kill them? I have the same question. I didn't find that in the history of the interpretation I saw, but Ella, looks like you want to say something about it.
No, isn't Iker the same as sterile?
As what? Yes, yes, today, but I don't know when that starts. Well, Isha Akara is a sterile woman. But
But so in other words, they kind of made the horses sterile, that neutralized them.
right. So that would be today's to neuter them or to spay them.
It's like I noticed in the news, and I read the Hebrew News 12 and Hamal, and it says they never say, for example, when they killed a terrorist, they said lo hargu, they said huslu, they eliminated them.
So is your suggestion that Iker here is a euphemism for killing?
I think so.
Yeah, that could be. That crossed my mind as well, and I'd like to. So somebody said, Richard says, so why not just take them? I mean, the first thing, one reason not to take them might be because they're not supposed to take their stuff, the booty. All right, but let's say what Kaufman says here, greatest, is because they had no idea what to do with it. They didn't take the horses because we don't know what to do with this. This isn't what we don't have that
I mean,
culture.
also,
In the 13th, go ahead.
once you capture a horse, you have to do something with it. And maybe they just didn't have enough manpower to capture them.
Couldn't food it. So Malka, 13th century, you're about to
In
say.
the 13th century, Egypt held sway over this region in Israel. So I'm wondering, by crippling the horses and destroying their chariots, if it really wasn't a backhand insult to Egypt.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, yes, we're talking about 13th, maybe 14th century BCE when these things are happening, right? And yes, Egypt is, we didn't go into the names of the places above, but many of the names that were mentioned that Sid read are mentioned in Egyptian documents and in Tel Amarna letters. That means those are documents written from that time that this was supposed to have happened. It still doesn't guarantee that this is a historically or a literal account from a historical point of view, but it does place us in that time. What we do know is that Israel didn't have horses, and we also know that there's an aversion to horses. If anybody remembers the law of the king in Deuteronomy,
With Solomon, with Shlomo.
Solomon.
One of the
before we
things
get to
they
Solomon, we'll get
say-
to Solomon. But the law of the king in Deuteronomy, lo yarbelo nashim, he shouldn't have a lot of wives, he shouldn't have a lot of horses. Yes, Ella.
No, I meant to say that Solomon made an alliance with Egypt, and he got the wives and he got the horses.
Yes, but that's not until Solomon. Good point. That's the point. What historians say, that Israel didn't know from horses and chariots only until then. All right, that brings us closer to the 10th century.
I still think it's kind of an insult, because in Shirat Hayam, right, that they destroy the horses and the chariots, and here they're destroying the horses and the chariots again. I think we got you in your own country, and now we'll get you out of your own country.
That's good. I like it. It's a symbol of the Egyptian hegemony, right? Yeah, hegemonia.
It said Susa verochbota v'abayam.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But all I want us to know is that that's not us. So then the question is, why couldn't they just kill them? Why do they have to hamstring? That rubs against us. And it's interesting because the Talmud asks the questions in a different way. it says that there's certain law in the Talmudic tractate of Avodah Zarah, of foreign worship, of idolatry, the things you're not allowed to do. One of them is you can't use an animal that belonged to somebody who worshipped idol worship, to a pagan, or was involved in pagan worship. I don't remember the exact thing, but it says there. So what do you do in those cases? You hamstring the horses. And then somebody says, but isn't that Sar Balei Chaim? Isn't that the needless suffering of animals? There's a mitzvah about that. Well, it's not an official one of the 613 mitzvot, but that's also considered. Yes, there is. Yeah, ever minachai, not to eat. Yeah, there is not hurting an animal is also considered to be from the Torah. And the answer in the Talmud is, but there's a specific mitzvah from God to Joshua that's what he's supposed to do. That's how they get out of it. That only tells me that it bothers somebody. It bothers somebody in the 3rd, 4th century, 5th century, the Common Era, to say, wait a minute, why not just kill it? Why, one of the 7 of the commandments to the children of Noah, Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, is not to eat ever min achai, not to eat a limb from an animal which is still living. Which, when it was explained to me, I don't know if this makes any sense historically, but since they didn't have refrigeration, so they'd cut off the leg of a cow and they'd eat that. They keep the animal living, but they eat the leg off. The whole thing sounds rather gory to me. My conscience was clean because I've been vegetarian since age 12. So when I learned these things, it didn't bother me because I wasn't part of it. But I say that that there is that idea, better to kill, better slaughter. It's not that you're not allowed to slaughter an animal, but why take just part of, why make the animal suffer? So somebody is bothered by all this, but I couldn't find a reason why they shouldn't just kill the horses as opposed to hamstringing them. And maybe hamstringing was thought to be more humane. Maybe that was thought to be more humane. And by the way, Richard, maybe that means that's what it meant to set them free. If they set them free in the way that they were, then the enemy could recapture them and use them again. But if they're hamstrung, well, then they're out to pasture. They end their days eating green grass. Yes, Ella?
They suffer.
But maybe
I don't know that they suffer. So that's just it. I don't know that we know that they suffer.
Well,
But
because
maybe-
like if you let's take an analogy from today, when racehorses break their legs or something, they put them,
They
they
shoot
kill
them.
them. Right, because they're useless and it's painful and they can't help them. So to cripple them seems to me really cruel. I just not didn't
Yeah,
just
well, hamstring doesn't mean breaking the leg. It means severing the tendon in the leg
okay.
so that they can't walk properly.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay. Let's one last comment from Ella, and then I think we're going to move on.
Maybe it's just the wrong translation.
Well, so I looked into that, Ella, that it's not just here, right? It's also, if you remember, in when Jacob is cursing Shimon and Levi, and he says, "Birtzonam ikru shor, ikru sus." In other words, when he's putting them down for that attack they did against the Shechemites, he says that they did the same thing to the animals. It's not in the account in Genesis, in the earlier part of Genesis, but in Genesis 49. So Rashi there says, Rashi interprets it as symbolic, is they tried to neutralize Joseph, who was, it says ikru shor, that they hamstrung the cows. And Rashi says, no, that doesn't mean, see it as a metaphor for they tried to neutralize Joseph, who was like a shore, like an ox. So I think it's pretty much understood that that's what Ikar is. Anyway, I think we should go on. I think we've got stuck a little bit with the hamstringing here. But definitely, okay, let's anything else, other issues in these first 2 paragraphs? Okay, Megan, why don't you lead us through 10 to 12?
Joshua then turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms. They prescribed and put to the sword every person in it. Now the soul survived, and Hazor itself was burned down. Joshua captured all those royal cities and their kings, put them to the sword. He prescribed them in accordance with the charge of Moses, the servant of God.
Okay. Just a little note on the name, because it has here that they burnt them with fire, Saraf. You may have seen a place name at the top that Sid had a little trouble pronouncing, that all of us would have pronouncing. Where was it? Misrafat Yam, I think. Sefot Mayim. Where is it? Where? I'm looking for the
It's
English.
6 through 9.
Yeah, Misrafot Mayim. So Misrafot Mayim in the third line from the bottom. So I was intrigued by that, of course. Like, what does that mean? Misrafot, like usually Saraf means to burn, something burn. Is it perhaps the place where they burnt things near the sea, where they're burning the garb, making charcoals? Turns out Kaufman says that the shorish, the root sin resh pei, has to do with a high point, like the srafim, those that are in the heavens, the serpents that are in the heavens. I think I think it's connected to srafim, but anyway, saraf is in the high point. He points to places in the area of Rosh Hanikra, which is the northwestern border of Israel with Lebanon right now. There's cliffs and high points above the sea. Anyway, down here though, it's definitely burning. So one challenge we have is if Chatzor was absolutely destroyed, the king, then how could they come back and have the fight in the time of Dvorah, just a generation or two later, or a time later? That's what brings some scholars to think this is the same story, in essence, a different version of the story that we have in Judges 4 and 5. And Judges 4 and 5, we also have two versions of the story. We have the narrative prose and the poetic, the epic poetry. Interesting. Anything else here? One thing that struck me was that Moses suddenly shows up here quite a bit, and I bolded those. It feels again like the author here again wants to reiterate that point that he's made in the past. Joshua is the rightful inheritor of Moses's leadership. Right?
What was the charge of Moses? I was trying to think of what that was.
Oh, you mean where it was?
It says the last line that we just read, it says,
Yes.
in accordance with the charge of Moses. What was that charge?
Yeah, you want to know where in the Torah, for instance, it was. So I think that's the end of when Moses is charging Chazak v'amatz to Joshua, that whole thing. You should have strength of heart to go and to capture these people. Now we're going to see something in a second. Yeah, in a little bit we'll see something which is really interesting because it's definitely not part of the Torah, but yeah, there's a tendency again in scholarship over the last 100 years to connect this, or 70 years, to connect this whole chapter with the book of Deuteronomy. It seems like there's a lot of overlaps here, but also bringing Moses back into the picture. It's almost as if one of the narrators at some point said, listen, you guys are talking a little bit too much about Joshua and how successful he is. Don't forget that Joshua is only successful because he's following the footsteps of Moses, and he got the blessing from Moses to be the leader. That's kind of my impression, which I can't prove. Total speculation. Okay, it's good to speculate, right? And speaking of speculation, Richard, you want to read the next?
Okay, so however, all those towns that are still standing on their mounds were not burnt down by Israel. It was Hazor alone that Joshua burnt down. The Israelites kept all the spoil and cattle of the rest of those cities but they cut down their populations with the sword until they exterminated them. They did not spare a soul, just as the Eternal had commanded God's servant Moses. So Moses had charged Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that God had commanded Moses.
So Malka's question was, again, where is this written? It's not written specifically as far as I can see. It's an overall feeling that this is what Moses did commission Joshua to lead the people in conquering the land. but it wasn't said step by step, and then you go against this one, then you go to this one. This is Joshua, this whole chapter is Joshua responding, and the people of Israel responding to a coalition of kingdoms, of fiefdoms, of whatever in the northern part. And interesting to see here, they were allowed to take the booty. So sometimes they're not allowed to, and sometimes they are allowed to take the booty. And I think that's, it feels sometimes like there was an ideological line amongst the writers, the narrators of our stories that said nothing from the Canaanites should be used whatsoever, because that will lead the Israelites back to idolatry. Nothing whatsoever. It all has to be eradicated. On the other hand, there was another school of thought amongst the narrators, the writers, that said, hello, they have to live someplace. They've got to eat something those years. They've got to, there was no, what's it called, inherited wealth, 40 years wandering in the desert, right? There's got to be some basis for the building. You don't just conquer land. Maybe that's the thing. In some people's mind, and I think it's naive, is what you do is you take over land. Now I'm going fast forward to the 19th, 20th century. You go and take over land. But in reality, there is no such thing as just land. There's land with buildings and people and plants and animals and whatever. There's not just land. And I think that might be a struggle in people's minds in telling the story of Palestinians, telling the story of Palestine, and of Jews telling the story of Zionism, or other places around of the United States, whatever it might be. That's a story of the United States when it comes to land. The story of the United States when it comes to people, human beings, and slavery is a different kind of a story. But that's mostly because those people were not related to as people, but as property. But this idea of manifest destiny and going westward and capturing the land, and it's the land which is important. And of course, the land meant resources as well, but nobody was talking about villages or thinking about the people, the villages, the culture. I guess that's my point. Two competing schools of thought when it comes to writing histories. Yes, Ella?
No,
Oh, okay. All right, so what happens is that I can see a box will light up in green. Many of you know, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if you see this when you're not the host, but if a box lights in green, because sometimes they move a cup on their table, and then I think they're seeing something. Okay.
What's curious if Joshua and company and the Israelites destroyed Canaan, when they come into the land, how come they still have Ashtaroth and all those Canaanite things? If they destroyed everything, where did they get any idea and notion about all of that?
That's kind of my point.
Yeah,
that's kind of my point, Marco. First of all, the stuff about Ashtaroth, the idolatry, the paganism was written hundreds of years after this purported to happen, but so it still needed to be in existence. But that's exactly my point. There was an ideological, naive way of looking at this, where the people came in and just inherited the land. And then there's the realism, and the realism is that that's not the way it happened. If it even happened in a violent way, some people say this was a peaceful annexation, conquest of the land from a cultural point of view. You know that from your studies in university, but we don't necessarily talk about that here. Not everybody accepts that there was such a thing as the conquest war from a historical point of view. That these were stories created long times afterwards, and looking back over to create this sacred history.
Right, because the Israelites when they did settle into the land, they had to live in the hill country.
Yeah, so I think there's competing schools of thought in how you tell the story, and both of them held on to it. And so that's why you have some cities which are totally destroyed and annihilated, and some which they're allowed to live. And that's why you also have this discrepancy. How, if they destroyed Chatzor here, how could Chatzor be this great kingdom that needs to be defeated in the next book of Judges?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Again, at the end of this paragraph is Moses. Moses. Let's go on to 16. Let's see if we can finish today. Rita Claire, 16, 17, please.
Joshua conquered the whole of this region, the hill country of Judah, the Negab, the whole land of Goshen, the Shepherah, the, did I just pronounce that?
Doesn't matter, it's fine, go ahead.
The Arba and the hill country and coastal plain of Israel, everything from Mount Halak, which ascends to Seir, all the way to Baal Gad in the valley of the Lebanon at the foot of Mount Hermon, and he captured all the kings there and executed them.
But so actually, wait,
Go ahead.
Did you want me to continue?
No, Ella, you want to say something? Go ahead.
so actually, he kind of conquered present day Israel, including the West Bank.
Oh, yeah, the West Bank has always been part of this, right? That's why people.
Right. So actually, he didn't go to the other side of Jordan, to Abraham.
No, he was that's what Moses led that battle, right? Against Sichon and Og, and the battles that we have in Numbers and in Deuteronomy.
Because from the names that he mentions, all the names are now present day Israel. They're, in other words, they're south of Hermon. They didn't go north of Hermon. It's south. It's the Arava, which is actually, as far as I know, is south of the Dead Sea. So it looks like it's present day Israel. It's very easy to follow.
Okay, except for two things. One, when it comes to names that we have in the Bible, in the Tanakh, and names we have in Israel today, very often there's a correlation, but sometimes there's not. And that's because names were Hebraicized at different times, according to what we knew from biblical literature. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they were the same place. That's one issue. The other issue is that certain words, as I mentioned before, about a half an hour ago, certain names are used in multiple places. Like, I didn't say that today, but Gilgal, there are a number of sites that could be Gilgal, because Gilgal was probably a circle of stones that became which was a template for a holy place, for a temple, for a template for a temple. In this case, the Arava. Arava here doesn't mean the Arava south of Beersheba before on the way
Right.
to the Arava here means the desert of the Bika, of the southern Bika. And so while it says here all the way to Baal Gad, the valley of the Lebanon at the foot of Hermon, that's the northernmost part, but it feels like in the first verse here, he's talking about a different war. This is not the same northern war. This is another war. It's a tricky passage here. It's a central Israel war, and then it sums up with saying in that way he covered that entire place. But now we have a summing up, though. Let's go ahead and read. Ella, why don't you read 18 to 20?
I have a question before you
Yes,
go.
go ahead.
What I don't understand is that Israel was not defending themselves. They were the ones that were going after all these people in these different regions and conquering them and destroying them.
So what don't you understand?
I could see defending yourself against someone who is out to destroy you, but it seems to me that here it's all about the Israelites destroying everybody else.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And hence the problem, the challenge of studying this material now. I think I'm guessing that part of what's in the background of your question is that we Jews thought of ourselves, certainly until the second half of the 20th century, as the ones who are always needing to be defending ourselves. We're not the perpetrators, we're the defenders. We're the ones who are being attacked, especially after the Shoah. And then comes the state of Israel, and right away we were attacked. And then in the 50s we were attacked. And then in the 60s we were attacked. And then in the 70s we were attacked. And then all the way through there, and the name of the Israeli army is the Israeli Defense Forces. That is all intentional, because our own narrative of the Jewish people, most of us at least, is that we are a nation of people who have been chased and persecuted, and we needed a place that we could call our own in which we could defend ourselves properly. So our narrative is about defense. Hence, you get you get some of the story that you saw yesterday in the movie, Rita Claire. The people feeling, well, those Arabs, those Palestinians, they're all bombers that want to kill us. We won't even talk to them because they want to kill us. Hence, you get the reaction from that person that came yesterday to the meeting and said right away, well, doesn't have, there's no context. This is the wrong context. You need to know the context for this, because she is in a narrative of absolute defense of the state of Israel, no matter what.
Mhm.
We see this on social media when people say, less so now, I stand with Israel. You've never seen me say that. You've never seen my social media say, I stand with Israel, but all of you know that I stand with Israel, but I don't stand in the way of a meme or an image on my Facebook page, because that implies that I stand with Israel and only with Israel. And what you've heard from me from the day that the war started was, with the pain and the suffering, that there is other pain and suffering. Now, I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm explaining my approach. And my approach is been in the last 10 years, 15 years, to reassess the Zionism that I was brought up with, to think that we are always the ones who are being persecuted, to understanding that with the occupation, which some would say was in defense, many will say we are in the West Bank because of defense. We have those settlements, West Bank, so that they don't come to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
Exactly.
And some will say that. Others will say, with the occupation, it makes us the ones who are out to conquer.
Okay.
Yes, Ella.
I agree with you to some point, but I disagree. For example, what is happening now, we attacked because we were attacked. We attacked Gaza and kind of destroyed Gaza because we were attacked, and just taking the numbers of the people is horrendous. I mean, 1,200 people is an astronomical amount of people for Israel.
Right, but you surely understand that others would say 25,000 is a far more astronomical number than 12,000, 1,200.
Okay. I mean,
But then Nella, and you rightfully say, yes, but they're not ours. Right? So that's the tension we're dealing with here. That's why this is super, super complicated, and it's all about the nuance. And context really matters. You and I, we can have this conversation right here. And this is the proper context to have this conversation. And we will be having it in person in a few weeks with the Chavurah, probably saw, right? As you asked for a few weeks ago. But
Yes.
but there's different contexts to learn different things. And we got 5 minutes. So Klaus, wait, maybe another comment, and then we'll bring it back to the text. Go ahead, Klaus.
Well, I was going to say we drifted here into the current affairs. I mean, what we're reading about happened, 1200, 1300 BCE. And I'm making my usual comment, I just can't see all this killing and killing and killing. I mean, physically, that's incomprehensible. What they do with all these people, the writer must have been thinking he's writing a Grimm's fairy tale or something like that.
Right, but Klaus, I would ask you to put it into
all the
context.
time about that,
Right, but I'd ask you to put it into context with ancient Near Eastern literature, which is being written at the same time. That's really the fair comparison, right? It's not, but I think a lot of this goes against the grain of you as a Jew, Klaus, and you as a Jew who fled from Germany with all your home story. This isn't what we do. Das ist nicht andere, unsere, right? Das ist the andere, right? That's the others, right? We don't do that. So that's the tension. Let's go ahead and read this last bit so we don't have the laying up in the air. Roberta, do you want to read 21-23 for us?
At that time, Joshua went and wiped out the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from the entire hill country of Judah, and from the entire hill country of Israel. Joshua proscribed them and their towns. No Anakites remained in the land of the Israelites, but some remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Thus Joshua conquered the whole country, just as God had promised Moses. And Joshua assigned it to Israel to share according to their tribal divisions, and the land had rest from war.
Okay, so we're not going to talk about the Anakites today. That's a total different kind of a thing we have in the past, and this is added in. There's a section it doesn't. There's another part with the Anakites later on in Joshua, but what I neglected to mention in 1820 is that this is the only place, at least according to Koifman, I would trust him, that there is a different view presented. It softens the narrative of the conquering, of the conquest. That is when it says not a single city, I'm in 1820, not a single city made terms with the Israelites. In other words, they could have made terms, says this one lone paragraph. They could have reached out and reached a peace agreement with us, but they didn't. They didn't. Therefore, the conquering was justified. Yes, Ella. Unmute, please.
Unmute.
All right, we'll get to you later, Ella, when you figure out the unmute. Dan, could you read from us from Maimonides? I'm bringing it not to modern times, Klaus, but to, 1,000 years, to 900, 800, 900 years ago.
This is
If they do not
18.
agree to a
Oh,
peaceful
right.
settlement, or if they agree to a peaceful settlement but refuse to accept the 7 mitzvot, war should be waged against them. All males past majority should be killed. Their money and their children should be taken as spoil, but neither women nor children should be killed, as Deuteronomy 20:14 states. But the women and the children take as spoil. The children refer to males below the age of majority. The above applies to a milchemet harashut, fought with other nations.
Let me just mention, a milchemet reshut is it's English translation, an optional war, not a war for self-defense, an optional war. Go ahead.
However, if either the 7 nations or Amalek refuse to accept a peaceful settlement, not one soul of them may be left alive, as was stated. Do this to all the cities that are not the cities of these nations. However, from the cities of these nations, do not leave a soul alive. Similarly, in regard to Amalek, Deuteronomy 25:19 states, obliterate the memory of Amalek.
So what Maimonides did here was a slight change in the law and the Torah. The Torah says, obliterate Amalek. The Torah says, destroy these nations. These are the nations of the war that we read about today. For instance, even though Hatzor is part of a larger group of Canaanites. But what Maimonides adds in here was what's inferred in 18 to 20, you have to destroy them unless they, what does he say? If either the 7 nations or Amalek refuse to accept a peaceful settlement. The rabbinic thought already began to introduce the ideas. Joshua didn't go up and eradicate all these nations. They first sued for peace. When peace was not achieved, then this is what they did. It's a way of softening the violence that we're reading about. Go ahead, try to see if we can finish it up now.
How do we know that these commands are only referring to those who did not accept a peaceful settlement? Joshua 11:19 and 20 states, there was no city which accepted a peaceful settlement with the children of Israel except the Hivites who lived in Gibeon. All the rest they conquered in battle. This was inspired by God, who strengthened their hearts to engage in battle against Israel so that they would be destroyed. From these statements, we can infer that a peaceful settlement was offered, but they did not accept it.
So, and that's Maimonides' understanding, living in the world that he lived in, to try to, Klaus, to try to somehow balance how this is part of our tradition, because ideas change, values change. And that was 900 years ago. The question, of course, is going to be where do we stand in the 21st century, and who gets to make that policy, right? What government of Israel? What concoction of members of Knesset have come together to keep certain people in power? Any parting words, folks?
Are we done with war?
You
And there
wish.
was peace. The last sentence says, and there was peace, and the land had rest from war.
Right, so we are for a while. We will be dealing with mostly going forward with inheritance and borders, and I say I will have to work hard to make this. You don't have to work hard to make a chapter like this interesting. It might be disturbing, but it's interesting. Or when they seal up the cave with the kings inside, or hang them, impale them, whatever it is. But I'll try to figure out a way to make it interesting. Otherwise, I will never hear the end of it from Roberta.
Now, the other part that bothers me is that there's very specific points being made about every little detail, except once they conquer a place, kill everybody, they leave these bodies there to rot or whatever, and yet they're occupying this land that they have taken. No discussion about how to deal with the carnage that they have created. They don't
So
discuss
you don't
that.
just want the headlines, you want the story.
Well, they keep giving very specific directions on every other detail.
Okay.
Is,
All right, good.
is this whole thing known as, actually, it's probably, I mean, I think it's part of history, but is it definitely historical and not just historical fiction?
No, so that I don't know where scholars stand today because I'm not up to date. I don't go to conferences. I don't read all the latest journals, and I'm a little bit less. But there when I was at Hebrew University in the 80s, there were two schools of thought, and not Israel Jews and other Jews. There were two schools of thought. One was, let's base all knowledge of history on archaeology, and when the text comes into a disagreement, what we know from an archaeological point of view, for instance, Jericho was already destroyed at the time when the Israelites were thought to be having this war, then we say archaeology writes the history. Others would say, well, we don't always know. There's other things going on, and this is what I could say is that the school of thought that I'm from is this is the history of ideas that were present hundreds of years after they were supposed to have happened. Right, so it's not the history you're thinking of, but it's more the history of ideas, the history of values. How does somebody tell a story? If we look at different museums of the Holocaust, for instance, they don't all tell the exact same story. Of course, there is no one story of the Holocaust, but different museums will have different emphases on what we're seeing, right? Or if you want to hear the story of Section 14, which I was dealing with yesterday, you'll have a very different story from the tribe in the museum here as you than from that what you would hear from survivors or families of survivors. Just to let everybody know, we're going to add a Torah track this month already, before the end of not in March, but in February. We'll put out the notice already Friday, and we're going to go to a place which is where we can have a picnic, and we'll start with the picnic so there'll be no confusion over the food. We're going to be doing a lot about palm trees, and for those that want to take a longer walk, they'll be available. For those that just want to stay in the picnic area, that's available, but it won't be a long walk that we can do with wheelchairs. We don't have that kind of a place coming up. Yes, Roberta.
Is it possible to postpone it to March or April so that we could have, the blossoming of the beautiful flowers that we're going to get after all this rain?
Yeah, we're going to do them more often. This is not instead of March and April. This is in addition to.
Right.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to do them more often, maybe even once a month, even if it means fewer people. I know this doesn't include the people that are not living in Palm Springs. I apologize. But if we ever go to a place where
we can hire a private jet and get them here.
there we go. That's one.
Are
The
we going to
chariot.
are we going to have Torah class in person shortly? Maybe.
You know, you asked about it before. One of the reasons that is that you may know that we have to go to LA every week, and because of Sasha's work schedule, we try to remain flexible. If I put one more, I have in person on Thursdays. If I put another one on person, that means that I can't go away on Wednesday. I can always do this from my mother's house. That's the reason that I'm holding off with that. And it's not that I didn't hear the request. It's just that I'm not really sure how to do that. So
Wednesday isn't as important as Thursday, right?
no, but Thursday is different. Thursday is with somebody else, with Reverend Dan. Yeah, and it's a different dynamic. And yeah, And if we do it in person, it won't be this easy, by the way, to include everybody in the
No, I
conversation.
Zoom.
Much as we'd like to, you may remember before the pandemic, we were using Zoom already, and we would have people come on but maybe now we know it's hard to do the hybrid. Okay, anything else? If so, then let me hear about it in an email or a message. I'm always happy to hear and continue the conversation. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Bye, everything.
You.
Thank you.
Richard, how are you?